And just real fast, I'd love to introduce Brian Eschenhauer, who's here to talk to us about Spongy Moth. Brian is a senior extension associate with and an associate director at Cornell University's Integrated Pest Management program. With an emphasis in plant diagnostics, his work focuses on insects and plant problems, identification, and sustainable pest management. Brian's current efforts center on education and management of new invasive species, which are going to be not necessarily new, but something we're new to us at the moment. Um, and in this role, he is providing leadership for outreach of invasive pests, including spotted lanternfly and spongy moth. So my last plug, if you're here for credit, please make sure that you are signing in right now with your name and with your license number. We're going to answer all three questions throughout the hour that we're together, and then we're also going to sign out at the end of the program. And now you have heard me talk enough. Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks so much for coming.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Hillary. Glad to be here tonight. And yeah, let's talk about spongy moth. I know it's in the Hudson Valley and really affecting some people there. And let's get right on with it. And you know, this insect used to be referred to as gypsy moth. The American Entomology Society changed the name to spongy moth to because the name gypsy moth was offensive to Romani people, and out of respect for that, they changed it to spongy moth. And in many parts of Europe, it was already referred to as spongy moth. And we'll talk about what is spongy about this insect. We'll take a look at that as we go through the program today. But how did this invasive insect get here anyway? It's not native to North America. Let's give you a little bit of background about that. Well, this gentleman, Leopold Trevolet, a Frenchman who, in the United States, in Massachusetts, had an idea, and he thought, you know what? The silk industry, they're making a lot of money in parts of Asia. Why can't we have silkworms here and spin some silk cloth here in North America? But the silkworm moth um, does not do well in North America. It needs really warm, humid conditions. So that's not going to be suitable. So he thought, well, there is this other caterpillar that kind of looks like it and eats leaves too. Maybe I can hybridize this one, the spongy moth, with the silkworm moth. And he was working a little bit in a lab, and working with it actually outside. And um, shortly after, this is what the area around his house and lab looked like: defoliated trees. So a lesson learned there. But in addition to being an amateur entomologist, he was really a professional astronomer and an artist as well. And that was his main job. It's one of those where you say, oh, you might have stuck to your day job. But um, here is an image in Massachusetts after it escaped. They realized it was a problem. To save some of the important trees, they put people out there on ladders and climbing up into trees to scrape the egg masses. We'll take a close look at the egg masses, and that's something that we can do on our own trees. But yeah, can you imagine the cost of that today to put people up in trees? And I don't think it would be OSHA approved. Pretty dangerous climbing like that. But it was recognized as a problem in Massachusetts in 1922, and we'll look at how it spread here in just a second. But I want to go back to old Leopold here and just kind of finish up the story. So here are some images. He was the first to let people see what could be viewed um, through telescopes. And these drawings were the first that people saw the rings of Saturn and the spot on Jupiter. And so he's really known for that. And it's interesting. Star Trek even used his image of Jupiter in one of their episodes. You can see it right back here. And I think that's actually part of the set, so you could probably see it in more than one episode. So just a little trivia there. Person who released the spongy moth in North America also was an astronomer and had a small tie to Star Trek. All right, back to our main topic here. So there it is. That red dot is where Spongy Moth was first kind of released into the United States. And all the blue area is where it is spread to, and the green area is areas where it's still spreading. So it's still working its way across North America, kind of a slow march. And when it's new to an area, it's really devastating. Now, it came through New York State 30 some years ago originally, but now we're seeing a resurgence, and we're not sure exactly why, and it's really spotty. And I'll show some maps of where it is. But I wanted to show this. So this is the progression of one of, the invasive species, and it's just a reminder that things can be released sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally and cause problems. And I work a lot with invasive species. Here's one that just came up into the news recently. So affecting Western New York and Western Pennsylvania along Lake Erie. Uh, People sometimes feel bad about they don't want the goldfish anymore, so they release it into a waterway. And this one actually, it's goldfish. You'd think, yeah, that's harmless. Why would that be a problem in our Great Lakes? It's actually a big problem. It eats the aquatic plants. It digs in the lake bottoms and causes the water to appear muddy and competes with the local fish and can spread parasites and those kinds of things. So not something we want to do. Thankfully, we're not like Florida, where in the Everglades, the pythons that were pets were released and now they're a big problem. So it's something we want to be aware of. And it's camping season. So when you're moving, you're out there, you're setting up your camp, and you're setting up a campfire, please buy the firewood where you burn it. It's really tempting. I used to do it myself. I've got some firewood. I'm going to bring it along when I go camping. I don't do that anymore because spongy moth and so many other insects could be on the outside of our logs or bored in. Sometimes there's a borer inside a log that could come along with us. So uh, just don't cart it. Every campground has a place. If they allow campfires, they have a place where you can buy firewood. So just a little public service announcement about invasive species in general. And because we want to protect our forest. And back to spongy moth here. And on the right-hand side, you can see the defoliation that does occur. I took this picture 4 or 5 years ago when it was a problem in upstate New York at a place where I was camping. And let's go through kind of the year here that was taken in early July, but in the winter, it looks like this. And this is really how it gets its name because that egg mass there is a little spongy. It's like this felted material, and if you press on it, it's a little bit flexible. But you can peel it off. And here I did that. That's my hand there with the whole egg mass. And within that egg mass, if you rub your fingers together, and here's a close-up look of it, you can break it apart. And these are about the size, the individual eggs that are in this kind of fibrous matrix that the female lays, um, these are about the size of poppy seeds. You can see there are a lot of eggs in a single egg mass. And then in May, early May, the eggs start to hatch, and you can see how small they are. Well, the eggs are small, so those little caterpillars, when they first come out, are going to be really small. So, about an eighth of an inch long. Tiny little insects that often go unnoticed, but they start feeding right away. And they're timed to come out just as the leaves are emerging. If they came out too early, they wouldn't have anything to feed on. They feed on those nice, tender, young leaves that are coming out. And at first, you just see holes. But then, as the feeding continues, they can completely defoliate trees. And this is like later June and maybe early July before they finish feeding, where they're rather large and they can really defoliate a whole tree. And it's those big caterpillars that are doing the damage, and they are chewing. Some insects suck sap out of trees. This is one that chews the foliage, and it sometimes leaves the mid veins, like you can see here. Close-up view of that foliage chewer there, and especially when they're larger, you can see this feature where they have six pairs of red dots here. One, two, three, four, five, six, and four pairs of blue dots. We don't count the ones on the head here, but one, two, three, four. So pretty colorful. When they're younger, the blue and red are not as prominent. They're all gonna kind of look blackish. But they have a lot of hairs on them, and that makes them not as attractive to birds as many other caterpillars are. Um, so there's not a whole lot of bird predation. That would be nice if that occurred. So they're damaged, just to recap, they can strip the leaves of trees and they can weaken trees because without the foliage there, the trees aren't going to be able to capture the sun's energy, put it into the trunk and into the roots. And so that tree is going to be slightly weakened. Fortunately, large trees have a reserve in them, in the roots, and actually within the trunk of the tree. So they can rely on that. The defoliation stops in July. They stop feeding, and most trees can put out a second flush of growth. That does stress the tree to put out new leaves in the summer, but it saves the tree. Um, and even if they're not completely defoliated, it can be stressful to lose that amount of leaves, and it can make the trees more susceptible to other pests like diseases and other insects. If the defoliation occurs for 3 years or so, it can lead to tree death in some cases, especially if it coincides with a drought or something else that stresses out the tree. So it's not common, and I don't think we've seen tree death recently in anywhere in New York State due to spongy moth, but it is possible. I think it was in Massachusetts where they had a resurgence about 10 years ago, and there they did lose some trees because unfortunately a drought occurred like in year 3 of defoliation. So that's the kind of damage um, that can occur. What kind of trees does the spongy moth caterpillar like to feed on? Well, they have a lot of plants that they can feed on. I did highlight here, put in bold oaks because they really love oaks, particularly white oaks, but any oak tree is going to be their favorite. But all these trees can be damaged by spongy moths. And even conifers, maybe it's not their favorite, but if they're there, I've definitely seen spruce damaged. You're going to see some pictures I have where I saw Douglas fir seriously damaged, and even hemlock. So there are some of their favorite host species. And yeah, here is a shot in June that I took. This was actually on a Christmas tree farm that had Douglas fir, and there are some of the spongy moth caterpillars that fed on the foliage. You can see that all the interior foliage is brown there. And unlike our broadleaf trees, the evergreens do not have the ability to put out a second flush of growth because so unfortunately this block of trees died. It was just a small block in part of this big Christmas tree farm, but that can occur, and it can occur even in our landscape on a tree like a spruce that if it becomes completely defoliated and can't put out new growth, they will die. So conifers aren't their first choice, but they can feed on them. There are some trees, though, where it's just really unlikely to see them feed. And there's a good list of those where we're just not going to see significant damage at all. They'll maybe start to feed, but they'll try to find their way to another tree. And this includes some large trees. It also includes um, shrubs like arborvitae and juniper that are resistant, dogwood and spicebush, which is a small tree, and holly as well. So those are some of the resistant um, plants for spongy moth. All right, so we talked about the caterpillar stage, and that's where all the feeding takes place. And then in July, generally early July, they form this pupal case. It's kind of like a cocoon. And this is what it looks like. And you'll see them randomly on the ends of trees. Sometimes you'll see on tree branches. You'll see them, sometimes see them on tree trunks. Just about anywhere where that caterpillar crawled to form this basically a shell around themselves. And that's where metamorphosis takes place. And then later on in July, we can see the adult moth come out. And this is a shot of both a female, which is the larger white one, and a male moth there. Female moth cannot fly, so the male moth flies around and finds the female, and they mate, and then she'll be able to lay eggs. Just another shot of the male and female here first, though. You can see she has wings, but she's completely flightless. So the muscles that are needed for flight just don't occur in the female spongy moth. And here's what happens in the late summer when the female lays her eggs. You can see the egg mass there below, and she'll actually die just above the egg mass. And you can see dead spongy moth females above an egg mass for a while. Eventually, however, um, the carcass will fall off, and you'll have what are showing at the right there with a quarter, just so you can get an idea on the size. Sometimes they can be longer than the width of a quarter, but these are shorter ones there. And yeah, and in some trees, they are pretty well camouflaged, and they can lay those egg masses on anything. So that could be outdoors on lawn furniture, on firewood that we talked about before, just anything that is outside. So we want to be careful about moving those things where egg masses might be laid on. And yeah, that completes the life cycle. So going from the egg mass to the egg mass again. And this is just encapsulates it so we can look at where we are right now. So the caterpillars are out. We're here in early June. Eventually in July, we'll get that pupal case formed. And late July and August, the adults will be out. They start to lay in late August into September. And then it's just the egg masses from really probably for this area, Hudson Valley, beginning of September, the whole way until April or May. It's just the egg masses that are out there. So that does give us an opportunity to look for egg masses and to scrape them off. And that's part of the control measures. But sometimes it's difficult to see them, and sometimes they're way up in the tree canopy. I took this shot in a mostly oak forest in the Finger Lakes area a few years ago, and there are a lot of egg masses here. To help you see them, I zoomed in on this shot so you can see like this is this same area, but look at all of those egg masses there. And yeah, I put the arrows there. So you can get quite a few. The good thing is this is one of those areas that had a lot, maybe about 2 years, and by year three, the population completely collapsed. So those eggs hatched, there were little caterpillars, but they were not able to form um, the adult moth stage and in any number, and the population just collapsed and they weren't around the following year. So that's good, and we'll talk about that. It just does cycle through like that. And this is from 2021, just like a state view of where spongy moth was. Look at the Hudson Valley. Well, there wasn't any in 2021, and we're not sure exactly what creates these hot spots, but the New York State DEC does track this to some extent in each year. And here are a couple shots. I really like these of the Hudson Valley where they're kind of zeroed in. And we can see some areas like right here where it was a problem. If we look at this border in 2023 and in 2024, not an issue there at all. And there are some other places where it was a problem and then it goes away. And that's what we can expect, even in areas where it's severe this year. And so if when we look at that 2025 map, there's a lot that's occurred in 2024 that we probably won't see, and the same will be true what's out there now. I hinted at this, but here it is again. So spongy moth outbreaks, and here you can see a forested situation. They generally last 2 to 3 years, 1 to 2 years where the population increases, and then it gets to a certain point where the population is big enough and it collapses rapidly. And the collapse is caused by a combination of disease and weather that allows the disease to spread among the insects. So insects, just like mammals and people, can get diseases. And there are two diseases that they can get. And we can take a look at the first one here. So it is good news that they can get diseases because it controls them. And this one is a virus. So if you're out there and you see a dead caterpillar that is in this V kind of shape or an upside down V, it probably died due to this nucleopolyhedrous virus. And this is really effective when the populations are high. When they're crowded, it can just be an epidemic that spreads through the population of those caterpillars. So that's one disease that occurs that just really eliminates the population for a while. And the second one is a fungal disease, and that causes them to look like caterpillar skeletons. Essentially, they just completely desiccate. And this is one where it's true for the virus, but especially true for this fungal disease that weather, wet conditions provide conditions for the spores of this fungus to spread. And if we have like a really dry spring and June, then the populations might not collapse as quickly as we might hope. And that's what happened in Massachusetts a few years ago, where they had a couple of dry springs and early summers that allowed the caterpillars to escape these two diseases. So that's the natural uh, disease or insect control based on diseases that can happen. But there are some things we can do as well. And you can see that caterpillar with the bright blue and red there. But early detection is key in protecting the plant. So keeping an eye out, especially the evergreens. I've seen some some small spruce trees, and you want to catch those early because, as I mentioned, they don't have those secondary buds that push out new growth in the same season. So it's really important to look for that then. And another reason early detection is important is because the insecticides work most effectively when the caterpillars are really small. The smaller, the better. They're not completely big now. So, if you have some spongy moth around, it's still a good time to treat. You can remove the egg masses. You can just scrape them off. You can use something like a credit card or an ice scraper to help remove them. Yeah, you would probably want to collect them because if they were just scraped onto the ground, there is a chance that they could hatch on the ground and come up. Most of them would probably be fed upon by other spiders and insects in the ground, but it's good to collect those. And so if you have like a plastic Ziploc bag, you're holding it next to the tree, you can scrape into that. And if you put a little hand sanitizer or rubbing alcohol in there, that will kill the eggs. You can also do traps. I'm going to show you in the next couple of images some traps that you can put around if you have a spongy moth in your backyard tree. And there are also options for insecticides. The trick there is trying to protect a large tree with insecticides. But if you contact an arborist, they can help you out. So, oh, I apologize. This one is the center image is a little blurry there, but the burlap trap can work well. And here's where you take a piece of burlap, tie it with a string in the middle, and let it flap down. So it's pulled up for the photo here, but normally it would be down like you're seeing right here. And what happens is when the caterpillars climb up at night, they like to feed mostly at night, but they will feed in during the day too. But they are on the move. But when they're climbing up the trunk, they get trapped in this flap and get confused and just stay there. And so you can collect those and yeah, put those in a bucket and destroy the caterpillars there. Just another shot of that. You can also use adhesive traps. So this is like fly paper that is put around a tree trunk. This can also be used for spotted lanternfly. And the important thing is to buy some screen. It's really inexpensive. This is that fiberglass screen that's really light. It would be the same thing that's an option for window screens, and you can cut that easily with scissors. Just put some thumbtacks around it. The reason this is important is because when insects get trapped to the sticky material here, they are attractive themselves for birds and chipmunks and those kinds of things. And if a bird were to see something there, they wouldn't get stuck. I've seen, sadly, pictures of woodpeckers that their wings have been stuck to adhesive traps. So use that caution if you're going to use an adhesive trap. There are insecticide options. So, as I mentioned, the best control is when the caterpillars are small. The smaller, the better. And you can see these are active ingredients. Some of these will only be available to commercial applicators, but there are easily over 100 products that are labeled for use by homeowners as well. So the caterpillars are pretty susceptible to most classes of insecticides, so it's not too hard to kill them. The difficult part would be to reach high up into the canopy where they're causing a lot of damage, and that would be working with an arborist. There's one systemic product here that arborists can use that can reach up into the canopy, and they have equipment that can do that as well. One of the products that I like to point out, if you catch it when the caterpillars are small, especially, is a Bacillus thuringiensis. This is a bacterium that is harmless to us as and other mammals, but really affects a portion of the insect's digestive system, and um, that can be very useful. Here are some BT products, Bacillus thuringiensis, that are available for homeowners to use. So some options on a really soft product that can be useful for controlling spongy moth. And I'll point out that we have a lot of information on our Cornell's Integrated Pest Management website on spongy moth. Feel free to take a look at that. Just Googling spongy moth, Cornell, and you can get all kinds of information there. Right. And this kind of wraps up. I've saved a lot of time for questions. So, whoops. So please, let's have a discussion. Tell me your experience. Let's share that with everybody who's here, and yeah, let's see if we can answer some of the questions with the remaining time we have.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. So one question, the BT products, we always hear people saying, use it while they're still small. Is there a good cutoff for that? Is it a size? Is it a time, like a month or anything like that? What's the go-to for that?
Yeah, that's a great question because I can see why you're asking that, and there's no set cutoff. We just know that when they're younger, it works quicker, and it takes a lot longer when they're larger and older, and they can feed before they die. They can cause a lot of damage. It might take a week or more for them to die when they're older. So,
Mm,
at where it's just a matter of days when the caterpillars are younger, but no particular cutoff. It's nothing wrong with trying when they're a little bit larger. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't expect it, in July or, end of June for that to be very effective.
sure. We have another one. Do you know anything about that injectable pesticide, how it's the use for it versus having to spray the canopy?
Yeah, so that is something that an arborist, it's not registered for use by a homeowner, so an arborist would um, need to apply that. And yeah, that is an injected product. So it's injected into the base of the tree and then it's taken up systemically. It reaches the leaves there. And, it's only going to impact insects that are feeding on the leaves. So, we're not concerned about a whole lot of insects in the environment. However, there are insects that we want to have feed on the foliage of native oak trees because birds rely on some of those native caterpillars. They don't really like spongy moth because they have so many hairs. So the spongy moth are not particularly attractive to our birds. But
Mm.
yeah.
We have, do you know why certain tree species are less susceptible?
I think it's the leaf chemistry that makes them that way. And different trees have been exposed to different insects as they developed over the millennia. So each tree has a different set of defense compounds in the leaf chemistry, and some of those defense compounds will work for spongy moth and others won't. Yeah.
And do the caterpillars, so how do they go up and down the tree? Are they going to be constantly moving and wrapping the tree is going to help them stay away from the leaves? Or talk a little bit about their movement up and down the tree.
Yeah, yeah. So it does seem like a lot of energy for them to expend, but they do. They move up and down the tree, mostly feeding at night, but when the populations are really high, they'll be feeding during the daytime too. And some of you may have experienced this where it almost sounds like it's raining because of the droppings falling from the tree when the populations are so high. And there they're feeding in the daytime, but they tend to come down at dawn and go back up at night. So they're constantly moving. And you might think, well, couldn't they just drop to the ground? No, they crawl down and then they crawl back up.
We're getting a lot of questions then. So
Okay.
one person says we are losing a lot of mature oak trees this spring in Dutchess County, mainly mature 25-inch plus DBH due to repeated years of defoliation and the drought this fall, well, 2024.
Oh,
Should
okay.
we anticipate the spongy moth return in roughly 7 to 10 years, or does that rebound time vary widely?
Yeah, you picked up on it. It really varies widely. It's hard for us to know when it might come back to a particular area. And I think there's just so many variables. There is after an infestation, and the population collapses, there's a lot of the inoculum from those two diseases. So even if a spongy moth is reintroduced into the area, it'll quickly die from those diseases that are out there. And then the count or the number of spores tends to decline over time because these diseases just feed on spongy moth, and without the caterpillar there, they tend to decline to lower levels. And when that happens and spongy moth is reintroduced, you can get a population resurgence again. But yeah, it's there's no set rules. And I would hope, just based on what I've seen, I think it's going to be much longer than every 7 to 10 years. I think the interval where we'll see it back into an area will be maybe 10 to 20 years.
One can hope, right?
We can hope. And yeah, and that's kind of what we're seeing so far with this resurgence over the last decade. We're not seeing them come back again in that particular area right away.
And then we have if, sorry, that's loud outside. Um, if we were to cut down a tree from spongy moth damage, would you dispose and cart out the wood separately than other organic debris?
Yeah, you definitely want to be careful where you take that. If the trees have had, or if the spongy moth have been there at a time where they could have laid egg masses, the wood itself will be fine. And if the tree, if, has been dead for a while and there's no spongy moth active in that area right now or that current season, then there's no concern. Like if you did it now before the egg masses are being laid, which is not for at least a month and a half from now, you'd be fine to move that wood. But after the egg masses are there, yeah, that would be a concern. Yeah, right now you could potentially move the caterpillars on foliage, but if we're talking about the logs, that would be the egg masses we're concerned about.
And when you do have a tree that might have egg masses, is that something that you can chip?
Oh, good question. Um, will they survive the chipping? It is, I think it is possible that they could survive depending on how small the chips. Probably it's not likely and not a large number of uh, the egg masses would survive, but I think it is possible. Because you see, they're just the individual eggs are just the size of a poppy seed. Now, if that chipped material was composted in any way or left in a big pile and heated up, then then the likelihood goes way down. But if it was just freshly chipped, yeah, I think the eggs could survive that.